So this past week was my anniversary. I begin my 12th year of being happily solosexual. I'm glad I was able to get a lot of discussion going on my channel. People want to know how I'm being discriminated or prejudiced by being single, and for once I got a little bit of acceptance for that. In the past, people thought it was all in my head. So I thought I would reiterate all the different ways that singles discrimination happens in our world. So I gotta point out that you'll probably never hear somebody say at the workplace get fired for being single, not hired for being single. You're probably never going to get kicked out of a business for being single, although there are certain businesses that will charge you more for being single. You're probably never gonna be denied something for being single. Although I gotta point out that the whole world is built around a complex of people needing to be married, right? I talked extensively about this in a previous video. How I think part of the reason the big cities like Seattle, like New York, have become unaffordable is because it is built around the idea that you need two incomes to live in it, right? And if we got rid of the whole complex of the idea, Taiwan is a good example of that, right? You got a lot of singles who, you guys watched a few years ago when I traveled to Taiwan. I stayed in a hostel. You had people who had been living there for many years. They were solosexual, probably, and they could live in a group setting. That would never work in the United States because of how we view the idea of singles, right? Especially single men. We like to think of them as violent people, as serial killers. We really do. You talk about drug addiction. It's always the stereotypical single guy in his 20s or 30s, and has nothing better to do than to shoot drugs on the weekend, right? Anyway, I think if we built our environment around the idea that people could be solosexual, the dynamics of that would strongly change, right? So how does discrimination against singles/solosexuals happen in real life? Well, at the workplace, for example, you got a family man or a family woman who wants to go with his or her family to Las Vegas, to New Orleans. What are some of the popular vacation destinations? You get the idea. That's treated like a work-life balance issue, right? You'll hear a lot of workplaces talk about family-oriented workplaces, right? But when a single person wants to either go out by themselves or to go out to meet that future spouse and start that future family, when a single person wants to do either one of those, it's treated like a waste of time, right? I mean, you'll probably never hear the boss say it's a waste of time, but the impression that you get from it is that your boss doesn't think it's a worthwhile venture, right? So, for example, at one of my workplaces, I get my schedule and I look at it, and my boss just blindly assumes that I'm going to be available every week of the summer. I see all my colleagues, I can see the schedule. I see all my colleagues have 1 or 2 week gaps because they need work-life balance, right? I got one colleague who's still living with her family, and she probably wants to, she's a little bit too young for Las Vegas, but probably wants to go to Disney World. Oh, that's a work-life balance issue, right? I want to go stargazing for a lunar eclipse. It's your problem, right? You got to find time for that, right? I mean, the boss doesn't say that out loud, but you can see the disapproval every time I want to do something like that, right? Or go to a backgammon tournament. I missed out on the big Pokemon tournament. It was in Columbus, Ohio. I mean, that one, I could have went either way. It's a big travel for me. But still, the idea that my boss would just assume that I'll be available all summer kind of bothered me. Had he asked me and said how important it is for our clients, and I had the decision, I probably would have worked every week of the summer. I just didn't want it to be hoisted onto my shoulders. It's weird. Let's put it that way. My other boss, he called me on a Friday night and said, "Oh, we need this client wants to start Saturday morning. and please give them your best first impression. I got to read a syllabus, and I actually had to readjust my sleep schedule. The kid wanted 10 a.m. and I had to make sure I get up at 9, and I was getting up at 12 during that time, actually, because I also teach at a university, which is late night classes. And had he asked me, that would have been a whole nother story. I might have even taken the same hour, but he just told me. He didn't ask me. He told me to start, and not surprisingly, it did not go well. The end result was that I spent 4 or 5 hours reading a syllabus, adjusting my schedule for a 1.5 hour session of work, and the student wasn't happy either. And that's that, right? Had I had a family, he might have been more open to the idea that maybe I couldn't do this, right? So at the tutoring center where I work, I had a student who let's see, she's 14 years old, and she was nervous about she had just broken up with her boyfriend, and she spent 2 or 3 weeks completely out of it. And then she worried about how she was going to go to prom, and you can imagine what I told her about that. She didn't believe it was okay to go to prom as a solosexual, and she went anyway, and she told me it was okay. But that's the kind of environment we live in, where we feel that the fact that you would even feel any reservation about doing that really bothered me. The environment that she grew up in. And a few years ago, I had another student who had a similar problem. A boy this time. I think he was 16 years old, but he didn't tell me until after prom. What had happened was he took off tutoring. This is a one-on-one client I met outside of a tutoring center. He took off for a week. And when I came back to his home, his mom told me to try not to give him too much pressure. He just had an upsetting experience. He didn't have anyone to go to prom with, and without even thinking, this was before COVID. At the time, this was probably not even as popular. Without even thinking, I said, "Well, why didn't you go to prom?" I mean, he told me he didn't have anybody to go with. I didn't even see that as an issue anymore, because that had been my life for 9 years at that point. So I didn't even think about it. I just said, well, why didn't you go? And actually, the kid, he was like, oh yeah, and his mom also looked at him and said, oh yeah, why didn't you go? And so it was one of those mental blocks that our society has kind of enforced onto us. Now, I talked about how I believe Seattle and other big cities could be much more affordable if they were built around the idea that people could be single. I think a lot of activities would also be a whole lot more acceptable to do. For example, like I mentioned at work, a lot of times the things I like to do are treated as laziness, even though they're just as much a work-life balance matter as my family as my coworkers wanting to go out with their family. I think crime rates would drop a lot if we accepted the idea of solosexuality. Now, we just had a shooting in Texas, and a lot of times the news reports come out as these people were loners, and that's why they did what they did, right? We had another shooting last year in Colorado, and I think that's how the story came out. What other major crimes have we had recently? We had Columbine was the big event when I was growing up, and you can imagine the news reports talking about how these people were loners, never dated in their life. See, I don't think that's the contributing factor to the shooting or whatever crime is involved. I think the fact that they never dated in their life is their choice, but I think the fact that society declared war on that probably contributed a lot more to the shooting than the fact that they were single by heart, right? That's what I think. I think it's sad that people were marginalized to the point that this has gone on. Now, unfortunately, the problem is that everybody wants to be single or solosexual their own way, right? A lot of people don't want to come out of the closet. I think the percentage of people who are solosexual by heart is in the double digits, actually probably in the high double digits, right? Here in the Seattle area, I think 10% of people in Seattle are in the LGBTQ community. It's 6% nationwide. I believe there's a whole lot more solosexuals than we would like to admit, right? Look at every time something bad happens, it's because they were a loner. Or look at the high divorce rates, right? Look at how many people are in so-called sexless marriages, right? Well, what is a sexless marriage? It's basically two solosexuals who have a good friendship, right? There's nothing wrong with that. I don't know why we as a society have to give a label to that as a sexless marriage, right? I believe once people start coming out and it's popular, right? Just among my students, I more and more I'm encouraging people to go to prom as a solosexual, and more it's being accepted, right? 3 years ago, it was a whole different story. I believe once more people come out of the closet, more people will, and I think that's the big... I hope to see a big revolution where all of a sudden it's acceptable to be solosexual, and you'll see work-life balance policies that revolve around that. I really do. I want to see that day where there's this huge metamorphism of society, where all of a sudden, this past decade, the whole metamorphism has been on. A lot of people are accepting that you can eat healthy, right? It's not 100%, and unfortunately, a lot of people don't seem to get the idea that for some people, they can't eat crap in moderation, right? It's a lot easier for them to just give it up, right? I wish people would see that, but it's gotten a lot better over the last 10, 15 years. I hope to see the same kind of metamorphism of society in terms of relationships. We've kind of seen it in LGBTQ. Again, not 100%, right? I want to see it in the S as well, right? That's what keeps me motivated to stay healthy, wanting to see these days when stuff like that happens, right? There's a lot of futuristic issues I want to see. That's part of the motivation that keeps me going healthy. I want to see a lot more people go to prom as a solosexual in 2023. I really do. It gave me a rise when I heard my student on the last day decide, yeah, I'll give that guy's advice a try, even though it's crazy. And then she actually liked it. I like seeing that. I want to see more of it. And I want to see there be more solosexuals on the stage than couples. I really do. Anyway, and I want to see it be acceptable to go out alone, right? I want to see more travel packages revolve around the single person, right? For example, on Airbnb, I want to see there be more units that only fit one, right? And of course would be a whole lot more affordable in that regard, right? All right, that's how I see prejudice against single people. It's never spoken, right? Which is, a lot of people would say that, well, at least it's never spoken, right? Can you imagine if you were African American in the 1950s and people actually, told you to go to the back of the bus or all that? I would much rather see that happen with singles, because then you can respond to it, right?